Everybody, this committee will come to order. I welcome a number of our witnesses that are here in person. I think 3, 4, and another person is joining us remotely, and we welcome all 4 of you. I'm going to give an opening statement. Our ranking member, Senator Capito, will do as well. And Senator Bozeman, who's the co-chair of the Senate Caucus on Recycling, will be speaking as well as an opening statement. And I was talking to Passion, and who's visiting us from Detroit, Michigan, where my Detroit Tigers are. Hopefully, pitchers and catchers are going to report in about 10 days if they can settle this strike. I hope they will. But I have Passion. One of my passions, we're up here talking about football. With the Bengals, we got some Bengals fans up here. But I'm a huge Detroit Tigers fan, and Passion was a special welcome to you. I'm also passionate about recycling and composting. I have told Passion and Rhodes, I said I haven't recycled since this morning, come down on a train, and the Amtrak takes recycling, and we have composting capabilities in all of our offices. And so I composted right before I came over here, all the banana peels and apple cores and stuff that I wanted to compost. So these are things that I care about personally and have forever. Senator Capito and colleagues, I think I was a 22-year-old naval flight officer in training out in California, just joined my squadron, and we were stationed at near Palo Alto, California, and I used to recycle every month. Drive over to the recycling center about 2 miles from my house and recycle when it wasn't that fashionable. So I've been doing this for a while, and I'm too old to quit. Having said that, let me just get serious here, and although I have been serious, but and we have another big Detroit Tigers fan here too, Senator Debbie Stabenow. She and I share this passion. All right, good morning. I'm pleased to call this hearing to order, and let me start by thanking the witnesses for your willingness to be here today as we discuss 2 draft pieces of legislation related to recycling and composting. Rhodes Yepsen, is that the way you pronounce your name, Rhodes? Yepsen? All right. We don't have a lot of Yepsens that come here, or a lot of Rhodes, so we're especially delighted to have you here. Passion, I don't recall in 20 years in the Senate ever having from Detroit or any place else, Debbie, having a Passion as a witness, but we're delighted that you're both here. And Charles Lavelle, we're happy Charles, to welcome you. And we have joining us remotely, we have one more person, I believe. Is that correct? And I'm looking on my statement here to see who that person is. I don't see it. Ben Harvey. Ben, welcome, Ben. We're glad you're out there and joining us remotely. As ranking member Capito, Senator Bozeman, and our Recycling Caucus co-chair, and many of our colleagues know, the topic of today's hearing is something that as I just mentioned, I care deeply about. I won't bore you again with my passion or where it came from. But we all have a part to play to improve our nation's recycling and composting efforts, and I'm hopeful that today's discussion on 2 draft pieces of legislation will provide us with a bipartisan roadmap to address several of the challenges that America's recycling efforts currently face. Challenges, but also, I think, great opportunities. What Einstein used to say, in adversity lies opportunity. So that's what we're all about here. One of these challenges is the availability of good data. This past November, the Environmental Protection Agency released its first ever national recycling strategy. And this committee provided a lot, extensive. Michael Regan, the EPA administrator, will tell you, we provided from a committee significant input to the development of that national recycling strategy, and it reflects the bipartisan views on this subject. The document that's been released a month or so ago by EPA offers a transformative vision for strengthening our nation's waste management efforts, and it also highlights the need for greater standardization around data collection. To address this, Senator Bozeman and I, with the help of our staffs, have developed Recycling and Composting Accountability Act, one of the 2 bills that we're going to focus on today. Our bill would improve EPA's ability to gather data on a nation's recycling systems and explore opportunities for implementing a national composting strategy. This bill is an important first step to the national composting strategy. I hope that the experts that are here with us today, as well as other stakeholders, will support our efforts to get the ball rolling at long last. Today, we'll also focus on increasing access to recycling. Many Americans in disadvantaged communities want to recycle. They want to compost too, but are unable to do so because they live in neighborhoods that lack curbside pickup, bottle return, and other necessary recycling infrastructures. Senator Capito's Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act would help address this by creating a pilot program at EPA to improve recycling services in underserved areas. This legislation has the potential to bring many communities into the recycling world, including those in urban and suburban areas, while also protecting our environment. I commend Senator Capito for her work and leadership on this bill, and I want to work with her and her team to make sure the bill helps jumpstart recycling in communities with the greatest need, especially those that have historically been left behind. Both of the two bills I've mentioned are the result of true collaboration and reflect a substantial amount of bipartisan effort dedicated to explore our nation's recycling and composting challenges. This fall, our committee held several recycling roundtables, as some of you will recall, as well as a hearing on the importance of transitioning to a circular economy. The term circular economy is going to be something that people start hearing about, thinking about a whole lot in the days to come. But it's a way of doing business that would mean less pollution from landfills and stronger, more efficient supply chains. We benefited from the suggestions of numerous stakeholders on how Congress could collaborate with industry to bolster recycling efforts. Unfortunately, we also discovered that with awareness and motivation, we can do a great deal to address the obvious needs and change some damaging behavior. One product that stood out in recycling was aluminum, as many of you know. A few of us realize this, but 75% of aluminum, I'm told, 75% of aluminum ever mined is still in use today. Think about that. 75% of aluminum ever mined is still in use today. That's important because aluminum products made from recycled materials use 95% less energy than it would take to create from first-use material. I got to say that again. It's important because aluminum products made from recycled materials use 95% less energy than it would take to create them from first-use material. Indeed, in most cases, recycled products are more energy efficient, which translates directly into reduced greenhouse gas emissions, something we all care about. That is the power of a circular economy. As part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which really had its roots right here from this committee last year, Congress provided unprecedented levels of funding for recycling infrastructure and educational programs. The two bills we're examining today represent our next steps to build on these efforts to turn the challenges of recycling and composting into opportunities to reduce planet warming emissions and create good-paying jobs. Someday I hope to be asked by my children and grandchildren, what did you do to stop climate change and help save our planet? I want to be able to say my generation did everything we could, everything we could. And working with Senators Capito, Bozeman, and other members of this committee and our colleagues in the Senate and the House, and a lot of other stakeholders, I embrace the chance to work on a bipartisan basis to dramatically improve our recycling and composting systems in America. And by doing so, we can respect our planet, preserve the precious resources that God has bestowed upon us, and I might also add, create a lot of jobs, good-paying jobs, all over the country. In West Virginia, in Arkansas, in Delaware, Michigan, and a whole lot of other places too. And with that, let me turn it over to our ranking member and partner in this, on this issue and so many others for her opening remarks. And also, Taylor, I understand that Taylor, not Taylor Swift, but they got some bad news from Taylor. We'll miss her and we're grateful for all of her help.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for being here with us today. A lot of what the chairman has said as his opening statement is mirrored in my own statements as well, because this is an issue that cuts across party and certainly is absolutely essential in this committee. In 2021, this committee and the Congressional Recycling Caucus, which Senator Bozeman is the chair of, with Chairman Carper, they were extremely active in getting stakeholder hearing on stakeholder input on recycling policy. At that hearing, we discussed the need to expand material processing and manufacturing here in America and how a lack of demand for recycled materials is inhibiting market development and, as a result, an investment in recycling infrastructure. The week before that committee hearing, Chairman Carper and I co-hosted a roundtable called Leadership in Recycling, Sustainable Practices and Innovative Technologies, where we had the opportunity to learn about some of the technological advancements in the recycling sector directly from our industry leaders. Later in the year, the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, led by this committee, was enacted into law, establishing a new grant program for recycling education to reduce contamination and provide a feedstock of recyclable materials. This legislation also appropriated historic amounts of funding for recycling infrastructure and education. Today, we build on that momentum with a hearing on draft legislation to address some of the data and accessibility gaps in the sector to further improve recycling across the country. First, I'll talk about my draft legislation, which is the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act. This legislation establishes, as the chair said, a pilot program to improve recycling accessibility throughout the United States, with a particular emphasis on bringing recyclable services to underserved areas. Recyclable services, particularly curbside recycling, is not offered in many rural communities like those of my home state of West Virginia. In fact, a study released last year showed that West Virginia has a recycling rate of just 2%, when excluding cardboard, the lowest recycling rate in the states. If you include cardboard, we don't do much better, a recycling rate of 31% and a ranking of 40th in the nation. According to the most recent recycling survey by the Department of Environmental Protection in West Virginia, of the 50 county regional solid waste authorities, only 35 provide recycling services, and 5 work closely with local recyclers or municipalities to make sure that residents have recycling options. Together, these counties have 129 drop-off locations and 36 curbside. Of those, 14 are municipalities that have populations. We have 14 cities that have populations that exceed 10,000. And they are required to provide curbside recycling, but this is a problem. This is a challenge not for our state, but also other states that are represented on this committee, like Alaska and Wyoming, who face similar barriers. These rural areas share common challenges to accessibility, location and proximity to materials, to material recovery facilities, and the size and density of the population. This leads to low processing yields and high collection and transportation costs, leaving materials recovery facilities struggling to operate at a profit. According to an opinion piece on Waste Dive, something I read every day, that was a little tongue-in-cheek there, a news outlet covering the industry, quote, "It is not uncommon for a small town to put out a request for a proposal asking waste companies to bid on recycling opportunities and to not receive any bids back due to the lack of perceived profitability. This pilot program established would provide resources to increase collection and transportation of recyclabilities through investments to transfer stations, for example, providing access in those areas where a materials recovery facility may not be able to operate at a profit. Secondly, Senator Carper, Senator Bozeman, and I have collaborated on a draft bill, the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act. This bill requires EPA to collect and distribute data on recycling and composting across the country to provide an accurate reflection of the performance both nationwide and statewide. This is information that's critical for us to be able to evaluate how we can improve and how to best inform future recycling policies. Recycling is a win-win solution, as the chairman says, for our environment and our economy. In this political climate, it is critical that we remember there's a lot we agree on, and we need to be diligent in identifying and pursuing those bipartisan opportunities to improve the future, and that's what we're doing here today. It is with great sadness that I announce, as the chairman said, that I'm losing a valued staff member at the end of this week, and one who is here with me today, who has been absolutely integral in the recycling space, but other areas on the committee. Taylor Meredith will be leaving us. It is rare that you meet a person that brings as much intellect and enthusiasm, both in a personal way and a professional way, and Taylor is one of those. So I know she'll exceed wherever she goes, and we'll certainly miss her and wish her all the best. So Taylor, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Amen. Senator Bozeman, I oftentimes refer to our ranking member as my wing woman, and she refers to me sometimes as her wing man, and she has other descriptive terms as well, depending on how I'm behaving. But I just want to say thank you for being my wing man. And we've been, I think, great partners leading the recycling caucus here in the Senate. And we have a bunch of folks in this committee that are part of that and that are not on this committee. So, John, why don't you go ahead and make an opening statement, and we'll get.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to congratulate you and Senator Capito for the example that you set around here. We hear a lot about the rancor and this and that. We don't always agree, but I know that you two together are always trying to find common ground and find a path forward, which is so very important. So first, I want to thank you all very much for your attention to this important issue and for allowing us to discuss two pieces of legislation, the discussion draft of the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act that Chairman Carper and I have been working along with Senator Capito's Recycling, Infrastructure, and Accessibility Act. As a co-chair of the Senate Recycling Caucus, I understand the challenges and opportunities facing the recycling industry, and it's certainly very important to me, and I know it's important to Senator Capito and Chairman Carper. So we do appreciate you all being here very much. We've got a distinguished panel. When Chairman Carper and I began working on our proposal, we shared a goal of learning more about the landscape of recycling and identifying the challenges facing our nation's recycling and composting infrastructure. As you can imagine, the ability to recycle in Delaware and the ability to recycle in Arkansas are different. It's important to identify these regional differences, and so we can properly invest our resources to fix our nation's recycling challenges. I believe there's great opportunity to make improvements in the recycling space. I look forward to continuing to work with Chairman Carper and Ranking Member Capito so we can develop meaningful, long-term solutions that address the challenges facing the recycling industry today. Thank you to the witnesses again for your participation and sharing your expertise, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on these two pieces of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. All right, Senator Stabenow, I think you're going to introduce somebody from your home state. Please proceed. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. This is a really important hearing, and I'm so pleased that you've picked someone who's doing a fantastic job in Michigan as well as across the country. It's my pleasure to introduce entrepreneur, activist, and educator, Michigan's own Passion Murray. Welcome. Passion was born and raised in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and after college, she helped manage one of the city's leadership in energy and environmental design projects, which culminated in the country's first LEED certified YMCA. Today, Passion is working to improve the carbon footprint of Detroit and beyond by finding solutions for everyday waste and eliminating trips to the landfill through composting. She is the founder of Detroit Dirt. I love that name. Detroit Dirt, a revolutionary closed-loop composting company she started in 2010 that provides compost and food waste solutions to local businesses. Through her work at Detroit Dirt, Passion is helping to build a low-carbon economy by motivating communities and industries to have a zero-waste mindset. In 2017, she expanded her impact further by establishing the Detroit Dirt Foundation, a nonprofit serving the public through environmental education, research projects, and sustainable programs. And recently, Mr. Chairman, she was recognized as a United Nations FAO Food Hero. So, Ms. Murray, welcome. Thank you so much for the great work you're doing in Michigan, as well as across the country. I'm excited to welcome you to the committee hearing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Stabenow, thanks so much for introducing Passion to all of us. And let me briefly introduce our other three remaining witnesses. Rhodes Yepsen. Rhodes, raise your hand, please. All right, good to see you, my friend. Rhodes is the executive director of the Biodegradable Products Institute, where he advocates for the value of compostable packaging and its role in diverting food waste from our landfills. Welcome, Mr. Yepsen. We're also joined by Ben Harvey. Ben is chairman of the National Waste and Recycling Association. And Ben, I think you're out there in the atmosphere and you're joining us. I think, by remotely, and we're delighted that you're doing that. And our last witness is Charles Lavelle, Harrison, and goes by Lavelle. And Lavelle is the general manager for recycling and recovered fibers. He's joining us today. And Mr. Harrison, welcome. We're delighted to see you. And I think with that, we're going to start off with Mr. Jepsen. You're welcome to present your testimony when you're ready, and take it away. Thank you.
Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback on these two pieces of legislation today, advocating for our nation's systems for recycling and composting. It's wonderful to see bipartisan support on these two initiatives. As you heard, I'm here on behalf of the Biodegradable Products Institute, a nonprofit that advocates for the value of certified compostable packaging in diverting organic waste to composting. These two pieces of draft legislation complement each other very well. Starting with the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act, it will provide much-needed national level support by tracking and quantifying the key aspects of successful recycling and composting programs. This includes the topic of access, whether that's curbside collection or drop-off, the question of processing infrastructure, capabilities, and capacities. It addresses end markets for recycled material and finished compost, and it considers the importance of education and labeling. As I explain in greater detail in my written testimony, no one of these aspects on its own is sufficient for determining the success of recycling or composting, because these are systems of interconnected stakeholders that form a value chain. This is precisely why I'm so excited to be here today, as BPI focuses on systems-based thinking for compostable packaging rather than a product-based solution, meaning the items aren't just technically compostable, but are designed to fit into food scraps collection and composting programs. Looking at EPA's facts and figures, food is continually the #1 material sent to landfills and incinerators today. And the UN estimates that if food waste and loss were a country, it would be the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world after the US and China. That food is often tangled in non-recyclable food-soiled packaging that makes it challenging for composters to recover. Compostable packaging enables the diversion of food scraps and associated packaging. Groups like Biocycle Magazine have been tracking residential compost access and compost infrastructure for decades, partnering with groups like BPI on projects like findacomposter.com to map access. The last reports from Biocycle show that over 10 million households now have access to either curbside or drop-off food scraps collection composting, a number that grows each year but is still a fraction of our population. And that of the 4,700 composting facilities around the US, the majority accept only yard trimmings, not food scraps or other materials. The US Composting Council has done excellent work promoting end markets for finished compost, such as specifications for compost in use of Department of Transportation projects. Compost use helps restore our soils, improving water retention, pest resistance, nutrients for crops, humus for conditioning the soil. These benefits have been popularized in books and documentaries like Kiss the Ground and in research and reports by the Rodale Institute. Unlike with recycling, composting is inherently local. Neither the raw materials, largely food scraps and yard trimmings, nor the finished compost are going to be shipped internationally like recycling. The resources will be kept regionally for use in agriculture, landscaping, and other beneficial uses. Without the type of foundational data and reporting that the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act sets out for the EPA, and without grant funding for communities like that provided in the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act, we won't realistically be able to advance a national strategy to recovering products and packaging in a meaningful way, and we won't be able to realize all the benefits associated with widespread recycling and composting. A few small points of clarification. In the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act, we suggest amending the definition of compostable materials to include certified compostable products beyond just paper. Compostable products and packaging will increasingly be part of the solution as companies and state governments roll out commitments to making all packaging reusable, recyclable, or compostable. In the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act, we have 2 comments. The first is expanding the scope to include composting, as food-soiled articles are often not readily recyclable, and again, the EPA is estimating roughly 40% of landfill and incinerator-bound material made up of food, yard trimmings, and wood waste, meaning we'll need composting alongside recycling to make a difference. That would also help further align the two bills. Finally, we recommend modifying the definition of underserved to be more inclusive of urban and suburban populations. We definitely respect that distance to processing facility is important, but that it's not the only determinant for whether a community offers recycling or composting, and that there may be communities that already have recycling or composting programs but charge an extra fee for that service, setting a barrier to participation. These funds could be used more broadly. Thank you for putting forward 2 excellent legislative proposals to improve domestic recycling and composting programs, and for the opportunity to provide testimony and support. It has been an honor.
Oh, the honor's ours. Thanks, Mr. Yepes. Thanks for good work that you're doing and for joining us today. Patchen, you've already been introduced by Senator Stappenow, so we'll just turn it over to you to give your statement. Please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning to all of the senators, and it's an honor to be here. And first, I would just like to read a letter that I addressed, and then I will just make a couple of statements. But just for the record, I do support both bills or legislation. I think that we're moving in a step moving forward for the future for generations to come. So thank you.
Thank you.
Detroit Dirt, our mission is to create a zero-waste mindset and drive forward a low-carbon economy. The foundation of our work is in climate change adaptation in terms of food waste. This is rooted in specific actions that create movement towards carbon dioxide reductions. We must also address food loss and waste because the U.S. spends $218 billion a year growing, processing, and transporting food that is not consumed. At Detroit Dirt, we transport food waste from clients and process it into a high-quality compost. This impacts the environment by using food waste to its highest and best use as a compost product for agriculture. Diverting food waste from landfills also mitigates the generation of carbon dioxide and methane. The benefits of using compost in agriculture are many, including increased crop yields and healthier plants. Beyond agriculture, incorporating compost into contaminated soils mitigates contaminants such as lead and other pollutants. Compost also helps increase soil's ability to hold stormwater runoff, which impacts nearby lakes. Another important part of our work is in soil erosion in agricultural lands. The rates of soil erosion and depletion exceed new soil production by billions of tons per year. The unprecedented loss of soil health and productivity has been well documented. And in the U.S., there are reported to be less than 60 years of productive harvest. This speaks to the critical need to take organic materials like food waste, capture its embedded energy, and bring it back into the soils to increase the organic matter that agricultural soils must maintain. In terms of the environmental stewardship and circular economies, we know that we must take positive steps to make changes through strong partnerships. With these partnerships, we must establish foundations to support the next generation of people who will inherit a different world. Part of our vision is to prepare them for what is to come through education so that everyone can understand their own role, especially as climate change creates an environment where changing seasons will make food production more difficult, where a changing world will take competing interests for natural resources into uncharted territory. Our vision is to create a thriving, sustainable enterprise where employment opportunities are available to support healthy neighborhoods, sustainable agriculture. Infrastructure for food waste management within an urban setting means reducing our overall carbon footprint, while our high visibility and community outreach will create markets for a variety of products. The new generation of powerful electric trucks manufactured in Michigan, with further support of our vision transporting food waste and generating zero emissions. The challenges of climate change means that we must invest in innovation and creativity. While our work is measurable, we know some aspects extend far beyond those matters that are measurable or tangible. Supporting our community is a large part of our vision. We understand the value of citizenship, the responsibility of service to our community. To this end, I am in support of legislation, Recycling Infrastructure Accessibility Act of 2022, as well as the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act. I would like to add a few comments. When we speak about innovation, I, for the last 10 years, have been primarily focusing on replacing landfills and bringing education around anaerobic digestion, in-vessel technology, and other technologies that we can actually make byproducts. If we think about the methane when we bury food waste in the landfills, that carbon not only should be recycled, but when we look at the innovation of technologies that can capture that energy and use it for heating buildings, fuel, and other byproducts, this is imperative. I believe that across the country and the world, we're having issues around education. If more of our people understand in vulnerable communities that are impacted what composting means, what recycling means, and translating science, this is the low-hanging fruit of actually impacting climate change. Because it's not just about recycling or carbon cycles. This is actually about creating and manufacturing byproducts that we can create markets and retail, which is something I'm very excited about. So we'll get into that later, but thank you.
Thank you for that PS and for joining us today in your testimony. Next, we're going to hear from Ben Harvey, I think remotely. Ben Harvey, delighted that you can join us, and would ask you just to proceed, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Carper and Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee. My name is Ben Harvey, and I am president of Westborough, Massachusetts-based E.L. Harvey & Sons, Inc., a full-service waste and recycling firm servicing residential, commercial, industrial, and municipal customers throughout eastern New England. I am testifying today in my capacity as chairman of the National Waste and Recycling Association, which represents the private sector waste and recycling industry that is essential to maintaining quality of American life. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today and present you with the industry perspective on recycling infrastructure and accessibility and discuss its impact on us. Ensuring that all Americans have access to recycling provides sustainable materials management across the nation. Rural areas have unique challenges collecting recyclables and accessing recycling markets, leaving many communities underserved. Recycling has become increasingly complex over the past 20 years. To manage the growing diversity of materials, material recovery facilities, or MRFs, must have more and increasingly sophisticated equipment. Today's MRFs do not just have magnets, eddy current separators, and screens. They include optical sorters and robots. To account for the increasing equipment costs, today's modern MRFs are larger and service regions rather than single communities. They are increasingly run by private sector companies that can adapt quickly to the changing makeup of packaging. These attributes make recycling in rural communities particularly challenging. MRFs are sited near population centers, sometimes great distances from rural communities. Rather than curbside collection, rural residential recycling often consists of drop-off programs or private sector subscription programs with limited participation. Once recyclables are collected, transporting the material to processing facilities and ultimately to end markets represents another hurdle. However, rural recycling can achieve success through the hub and spoke model, which creates consolidation hubs that service small communities. These transfer stations are where smaller truckloads of materials are consolidated into larger truckloads for their final transfer to processing facilities. Rural communities interested in adopting such a model would benefit from grants for transfer station infrastructure construction and recycling tractor trailers and transfer trailers to move the material. Hub and spoke systems reduce transportation and provide much needed operational efficiency to make recycling viable for rural areas. That is why I was encouraged by the approach undertaken by Senator Capito's legislation. The private and public sector mutually benefit from a model where public sector can efficiently collect materials from rural areas and transfer them to privately operated MRFs for processing. Privately operated MRFs typically share revenues from the sale of the processed recyclables with the communities that bring the materials to them. We wholeheartedly support a program where rural communities can access the global recycling markets. Whatever we do needs to be undergirded with good data. Recycling, composting, and waste composition has changed significantly over time. Paper and cardboard have long made up the largest component of our recyclables, but this has changed significantly, with newspapers now only a third of where it was in 2005, and cardboard boxes from households increasing due to what we call the Amazon effect. Food waste has become the largest part of what ends up in landfills, and disposal of clothing has doubled over the last 20 years. As a businessman, it is important for me to be able to make decisions founded on good data. That's why I'm also pleased to support the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act that empowers EPA to perform the studies that we need. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Capito, for this opportunity to testify today. I will be happy to respond to any questions.
Mr. Harvey, thank you so much. And I know Senator Capito also appreciates your testimony and your presence. Thanks for joining us remotely. All right. Batting cleanup. I think Mr. Harrison. No, Lavelle. All right. Lavelle. Harrison, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and give us your opening statement. Lavelle, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and Senator Bozeman, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Lavelle Harrison, and I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Recycling and International Paper. We are a leading global supplier of renewable fiber-based products, which includes corrugated packaging products and pulp for diapers, tissue, and personal care products. We are headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee, and employ approximately 27.
Mr. Harrison, I'm not sure if your microphone is on. You could just double check and make sure. We want to hear every word.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Or maybe I'm too far away. Can you hear me now?
I can, yes. Others?
All right.
Yeah, we're good. All right,
I
thanks.
apologize for that.
That's okay.
Again, thanks for allowing me to be here today. Again, my name is Lavelle Harrison. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Recycling for International Paper. We are a leading global supplier of renewable fiber-based products, which includes corrugated packaging products and pulp for diapers, tissue, and other personal care products. We are headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee, and employ approximately 27,000 colleagues in the U.S. In our business, recovered fiber refers to paper and fiber-based packaging products that have served their primary purpose and are now ready to be collected and recycled. In addition to manufacturing, International Paper recovers more than 7 million tons of recovered fiber annually. In 2020, International Paper released a Vision 2030 goal, which demonstrated our commitments to building a better future for people, the planet, and the company. These goals are detailed in my written statement. As a company that truly embraces the concept of a circular economy, our renewable solution goal includes a target to create innovative products that are 100% reusable, recyclable, or compostable, a metric designed to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy throughout the company's value chain. I am pleased to share our support of the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act and the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act today, and some insights into International Paper's recycling business and the paper industry's commitment to circularity and sustainable practices. End markets for recovered paper products are strong, and thanks to the significant private investments by our industry over the past decades and established value chain of our customers, we support market-based approaches like the provisions in these two bills to improve the nation's recycling system. The paper industry is a leader in recycling. According to the EPA, by weight, more paper is recovered for recycling from municipal waste streams than plastic, glass, steel, and aluminum. Paper recycling rates have continuously grown over recent decades and remain consistently high at or above 63% since 2009. In 2020, nearly 66% of the paper and 89% of the corrugated boxes were recycled. The paper industry has planned or announced approximately $5 billion in manufacturing infrastructure investments by the end of 2023 to continue the best use of recycled fiber in our products. These investments will help increase the amount of recovered paper used by U.S. paper and paperboard mills by approximately 8 million tons, which would represent about a 25% increase in U.S. recovered paper consumption over the 2020 levels. Legislations like the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act will help companies like International Paper reach our goals. As a data-driven company, we understand to improve something, you must be able to measure it. International Paper proudly developed these stretch goals, and it takes resources like in this bill's data finding to help us achieve them. Our industry prioritizes data collection to improve recycling rates. The American Forest and Paper Association has completed 2 key data projects in the last year. This includes AF&PA's Access to Recycling study, which found that 94% of Americans have access to community paper or in paperboard recycling programs. The study also finds that 79% of Americans now have access to curbside residential recycling programs, making it easier for them to recycle at home. This represents an increase of more than 14 million people since the 2014 study was done. Second, last year, AF&PA released a design guidance for recyclability. The guide provides data for packaging designers and consumer brands to better understand how non-fiber elements such as coatings and additives impact the recyclability of paper-based packaging. This is another example of our industry's commitment to circularity. We appreciate that Senator Boozman and the Chairman Carper's bill supports EPA's national recycling strategy and acknowledges the industrial efforts are part of the circular economy. We strongly support the provisions that requires EPA to conduct a study of recyclable materials in commercial and municipal waste streams that for the previous 10 years were diverted from the circular market. We believe studies like this will highlight the strong recycling rates of the paper industry and will also help identify that we're close to our practical maximum and that more regulation is not needed to be able to increase paper recycling rates. Senator Capito's bill to help increase recovered material used by our industries and access to communities without MRF or material recovery facilities is also important. Without clean material for us, it's hard for us to serve the needs of both the growing e-commerce and customer needs for our essential businesses. Again, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, and I apologize for having issues with my mic to start.
You are not the first person in this room to have issues with the mics here, so we're good. Thanks very much for your testimony, Lavelle. Let me ask a couple of questions, and I'll yield to Senator Capito. She'll be followed by Senator Whitehouse, Senator Boozman, and Senator Stabenow, and then by others as they join us remotely or in person. All right. Question, I'll start off with Rhodes Yepsen. Mr. Yepsen, with respect to curbside composting data, you mentioned, I believe in your testimony, that your organization has been working on tracking residential composting programs, I think you said for nearly a decade, yet significant data gaps remain. How would a study of curbside programs at the federal level help eliminate existing data gaps and arm communities with the information they need to set up successful composting programs? Please proceed.
Yes, thank you for that question. I was fortunate early in my career to work with BioCycle magazine on some of that data tracking for residential curbside composting programs. And yes, while I've been working on it for a little over a decade, BioCycle has been at it for many decades. And I think what I'd like to highlight is that, as we heard earlier from Senator Capito, right, there are a lot of trade publications. Waste Dive is one of them. So part of the challenge is in collecting the data, and part of it is how does that information get out to the public? And so, as a publication, BioCycle does wonderful investigative journalism, contacting states and municipalities to get that data, collect it, collate it, and then report back out on it. However, there's a big distinction between that and what we see with something like the EPA facts and figures. Those reports are incredibly important for standardizing the type of data that's collected and for getting that information out to the wider public. So I think that's the main thing that I would highlight. That's how this would help fill that data gap.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, Ms. Murray. It's a question with respect to the national composting strategy and carbon reduction. As I mentioned, my wife and I are avid home composters and have been for some time. I'm deeply interested in the role that reducing our food waste could play in conserving space in our landfills and reducing the harmful methane emissions that contributed to climate change. Delaware is not a big state. We're about 100 miles from north to south, about 50 miles from east to west, and we need all the land we have, and we got about 1 million people, so we don't need to create more and more space for landfills. We need to figure out how to compost and recycle. But I think that this is an issue of social justice as well, as 30 to 40% of our nation's food supply is wasted, while nearly 14 million Americans, many of whom are children, experience food insecurity. With these potential benefits in mind, the Recycling and Compost Accountability Act would direct the Environmental Protection Agency to conduct a study on the capability of the United States to implement a national residential composting strategy. The question is this: what do you see as the potential benefits of creating a national composting strategy?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I've been waiting for years to have someone address these issues. And so first—
The wait is over. That day has come.
And it being bipartisan, this is amazing. First, I would like to say that if we really break the waste stream down and look at the economics of what the waste stream really is and the value of how much we're burying in landfills, that should actually create a red flag right there, because there's over $200 billion of food waste being wasted annually in this country alone. And so first of all, we need to make sure that the education and the awareness around this is just very crucial and imperative. But it's the byproducts that can be made from this. In the past history, people have been interested in the tipping fees and creating sites where they're looking on the front end of how much money they can make by discarding the waste. But it's not waste, it's a resource. Composting is actually healthy for soils, for our landscapes, our urban landscapes, for water runoff, et cetera. We have to look at the market and actually on a national level of creating retail and wholesale markets around this product as well. When you walk into a Home Depot or a grocery store, you have all these chemical fertilizers and chemically based products that we have to replace. There's no need to do that. We have the technology to actually create byproducts that can replace those chemically based products. And it's also healthy for not just the environment, but also we're looking at the economic benefit of that. But I also would like to say that the more access we have to sites, whether they're boutique sites of 2 to 3 acres or larger composting sites, we have to look at the energy embedded in this as well. When you truck compost or waste 30, 40 miles outside of the city, that's a lot of energy wasted. When you create a closed loop cycle or closed loop market within an urban community or rural community, you're actually keeping those products within that circular economy, which is a great benefit. So we're looking at social, economical, and environmental impacts. The key here is at Detroit Dirt, we wanted to be able to display the fact that we could take manure from the zoo, food waste from automotive communities, and keep that product right in the community for urban farming, for people to purchase, but also reducing emissions. So I think a national campaign around education and implementing these practices and doing away with antiquated practices is key. We have technologies, weather permitting, whatever region we're in, to actually divert that waste and create byproducts from that. So I think we have to look at the energy embedded in that. We also have to look at, creating the circular economy or local economy and the benefits. But I think on a national level, if we can look at a few factors here, making sure that we have education and awareness for the general public, creating curriculum for K through 12 schools. We're doing that in Michigan right now. I think that is crucial when our youth and younger students can see themselves playing a role in this. That's key because they can take that home to their households. But I also think that when we start building these new markets to pinpoint what products we can replace that's on the market that's doing more harm, but also when we're looking at reducing or emitting emissions, that's something to me from a moral and just ethical standpoint, it's key, right? And so I think at the end of the day, socially, economically, and environmentally, we're taking a step forward in a positive direction.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for all that. You read my mind. I had one more question I was going to ask you, and you've answered it without it being asked. So thank you for that. Now it's Senator Capito's turn. She'll be followed by Senator Whitehouse. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for being here again. I have a question for Mr. Harvey. Your family's company operates and provides recycling services in rural areas in New England. Can you explain why certain regions within New England have the infrastructure, geography, or special characteristics that enable curbside recycling, and why other areas in that region may not have that?
It comes down to the density of the municipality that we operate in. Our industry is all about density and it's all about volume. And we need to be able to send our trucks out in a dense area, and we need to collect the recyclables or the trash in one truck and bring it back to a central location. And we want volume. And so when you have a highly populated area, it's much easier to do curbside recycling. When you get into rural areas, even in the state of Massachusetts or in New England, when you move up into northern New England, it's so much harder to send that truck out and collect the material. We send in 2 trucks out a lot of times. What the industry has started to do is to start to use what we call split bodies. So we're only sending 1 truck out at a time to do it. But even in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where we operate, we have feeder transfer stations that feed into our MRF in central Massachusetts. And we need those. We need those feeder systems to come in and make it profitable for us to run our MRFs. So we run into the same aspect, not quite as rural West Virginia or some of the Oklahoma or some of the other states, but that's the biggest reason. It's density.
Right. Well, so investments you mentioned, and I think you've already answered this, in transfer stations and other mechanisms for increasing collection and transportation would be long-term solutions for our rural. You think those would be long-term solutions for our rural communities then?
Definitely would be. Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, our previous witness, Ms. Murray, was talking about a circular economy. So if you were looking at a transfer station system such as you have, and would you consider that a circular economy way of dealing with recycling?
I think the circular economy goes from the collection to the processing to the marketing and then turning it back into another product.
So no matter
the collection and the processing are only one half of that or one part of that. We still need the outlets for the materials. We still need to establish good, solid markets, which we worked hard through for years to establish those. We need to be able to collect the materials, but at the end of the day, we need to be able to ship them out to consumers wherever they may be, domestically or export, wherever that market is.
Are those markets,
closing the whole loop.
Are those markets increasing for you now, or are they static, or what is the state of the aftermarket after the process?
That's a very good question. We've certainly had some issues when China stopped accepting a lot of our recyclable materials. We've been very fortunate since that time that our domestic mills have picked up the need for more materials. You heard the gentleman from IP say about all the tons that they handle. So yeah, the markets right now are actually, they're pretty robust. They've fallen off a little bit from where they were at the end of calendar 2021, but they're still fairly robust. Another reason why we need to get into these areas that are underserviced and collect those recyclables, because there's a need and there's a desire to use those materials currently.
Right, and there's
Senator Capito, can I interrupt just for a moment?
Sure.
We all serve on different committees. Some of them are in session right now. I'm being summoned to come to the Homeland Security Committee for a business meeting. They need my vote, so I'm going to slip away for a while.
Okay, so you just need to recycle back over here.
That's right.
I got that one in before you could. Thank you. Just a quick question for Mr. Harrison on the data. collection. The most recent recycling economic information report from EPA was released in November 2020, but it was relying on 8-year-old data from 2012. I mean, I know in my own community, the ebbs and flows of recycling have been very apparent, a lot of it depending on the age of the facility that can recycle, the will of the municipal government, the available funds, the participation of the, residents, all kinds of things. If this legislation were to become law and improve EPA's recycling data, what insights do you think would be able to gain from analyzing this data?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. When we think about the data, again, when we think forest products industry.
You might want to move just a little closer to your mic. It's probably.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? All right. So when you think about the forest products industry and you think about what we do, we have a very strong and historical track record of investing in this infrastructure. We do a great job of collecting that product and bringing it back. The opportunity for us is how to make sure we're accessing all the fiber available. So when I think about this study and what it will do is even the data that we do as AF and PA, it's a sampling. The data that EPA will be able to do will give us a more detailed view of the country and the breakdown and truly be able to identify where those opportunities are to be able to collect that fiber, collect those recyclable materials, and get them back to some end use to make a new product. So I see the data as being very valuable in helping both public and private sectors understand where the opportunities are to drive the circular economy.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It strikes me that we have slightly different recycling markets for newsprint, for paper, for glass, for compost, and for plastics. And I'd like to focus on plastics because I think we have a real failure happening in the plastics recycling market. In theory, this should be a pretty vibrant market because we are seeing immense public pressure on the plastics industry to clean up its act, particularly as regards the waste that ends up in the oceans and in our rivers. We are seeing, frankly, outright bans on certain single-use plastics, sending what you'd think would be a strong message to the industry to clean up its act. There's considerable reputational risk for these companies as the propagators of the material that ends up, around some turtle's neck in the sea somewhere. So you would think that the conditions would be about as good as they can be for a corporate response with respect to recycling plastic instead of just churning out new plastic. And in fact, the numbers tell a completely different story. If you look at single-use plastic, which is the stuff most likely to end up in the ocean, in a whale's belly, tangled around a coral reef, the industry, by my information, has managed to achieve a grand 2% recycling component for single-use plastics. 2%. I mean, that's probably the number you'd get by accident. Under all that pressure, the best they can do is 2%. So something needs to change if this is going to get serious. Everything tells me that the reason industry is still at 2%, despite all this pressure, is that the real decision driver is dollars. And it's cheaper to buy new nurdles of plastic and put out your single-use plastic items than it is to buy recycled plastic, and therefore the industry spurns recycled plastic despite all that public pressure because of the pressure of cost. So it seems to me that's a really simple gateway to a solution to the problem to get us above 2%. If you look at it At our blue bins, I have blue bins that we fill with recycling. The record that I think we have on actual recycling, when an American goes to their blue bin and takes the soda bottles and the plastic waste from their household and actually puts it in the blue bin, is that less than 10%, most likely 6 to 8% of that actually gets recycled. More than 90% of it doesn't actually get recycled. It's almost at the level of being a scam on the consumers who in good faith are putting their plastics in those blue bins and aren't being told that the industry isn't recycling that stuff. A lot of it's simply being packed up and put into the dump. A lot of it's simply being packed up and shipped overseas to be put into open air dumps and end up in the rivers and end up in the oceans and go on from there. The responsibility of the industry for getting above 2% in terms of recycled content for single-use plastics, and for doing better than having more than 90% of what we actually put into those blue recycling bins be recycled, ought to be a lot higher. They ought to be accountable for those, I would say, catastrophic failures verging on being a fraud on the public. So I'm hoping that we can work together not just to measure the disastrous state of plastics recycling, but to solve it. And I would really appreciate it if each of the witnesses would take a minute when this hearing is over and take this as a question for the record and give me your ideas and suggestions as to what needs to be done to solve this dilemma of total plastics recycling failure that we are stuck in. I think it's purely cost. And I think if you're not going to put any kind of a price on dumping the plastic, any kind of a price on any type of an equivalence for recycled plastic versus new plastic, we're just never, ever, ever going to solve this. And we can talk our way around this problem forever, but the dollars drive the decisions, in my view. And I'd like your response to that, if you don't mind putting it in writing so that I don't take up more time in the hearing. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Bozeman?
Thank you. Mr. Harrison, Arkansas is proud to have two major companies willing to set voluntary sustainability goals. Walmart set a goal to achieve zero waste in their operations and reach 100% recyclable, reusable, or industrial compostable private brand packaging by 2025, while Tyson Foods transitioned from virgin fiber paperboard to 100% post-consumer recycled content across their Jimmy Dean brand and launched zero waste to landfill pilot programs at 3 production facilities, diverting nearly 5.2 million pounds of waste from their landfills, which was a 60% increase from the previous year. Mr. Harrison, how will the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act help companies like Walmart, Tyson Foods, others that are working hard in this area as they try and meet their needs?
Thanks for the question, Senator. Again, I go back to your companies that you referenced, just like International Paper. We have some pretty stretched goals out there, and we believe that we can achieve those goals. One of the challenges and opportunities as we try to get there is understanding what's impacting circularity. The first piece is, one, being able to have a packaging or material that is circular, meaning that it's recyclable, it's reusable, or it's compostable. Once we do that, the next question has to be, is it coming back around? And the thing that this act is going to do for us, it's going to help identify and help point out clarity where the gaps are so that we can take responsible actions with our private and public partners to be able to figure out how to continue to drive toward that 100% goal.
Very good. Mr. Hairston, oftentimes companies implement sustainability programs because it fits within their mission statement or core beliefs. But sometimes companies develop innovative sustainability practices because it makes economic sense to do so. Can you give us some examples of the private sector investing in sustainability practices to protect the environment while also helping their bottom line? And this is really what Senator Whitehouse was alluding to, and it is very, very important.
Yes, I think it's definitely a good question, and I think you're able to meet that momentum and drive when you can figure out a way to have both an economic and social solution. In that international paper, we're integrating our sustainability goals and targets into our strategy, into our capital plan and operating plans. This will ensure that we create that long-term value for our shareholders, and we operate a business that drives and delivers sustainable outcomes. We're not afraid to innovate in this space to meet the market demands and to advance the vision to build a better future for both the people, the planet, and our company. A recent service that we developed that meets this triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, is a system that we call eBoss. eBoss is a service that we provide to our customers. Our service focuses on analyzing the customer needs and being able to understand their shipment history and box utilization to then suggest to them the right size box to, one, reduce their cost for packaging, and two, ensure that they have a solution that is recyclable or reusable. Those are some ways that, again, we're able to, one, meet our goals of sustainability and circular market, and at the same time being able to help reduce costs and drive economic benefits for the companies that we're working with.
Right. As you allude to, paper recycling rates are one of the great success stories within the industry, with an approximate 66% recycling rate and 94% of Americans having access to a community paper recycling program. Additionally, 82% of the U.S. population has access to community recycling programs that accept pizza boxes. What are some of the lessons other commodities could learn from the paper industry to improve their rates? And again, going back to the very important question that Senator Whitehouse raised.
Yeah, again, I think it continues to go back to, we believe in producer responsibility, and we continue to show our commitment with our investments over our last 3 decades. And as we, continue to meet the needs of our customers, working together as an industry is important. The pizza box recyclability was a concern that as an industry, we put our heads together and said, how can we resolve that issue? What is the concern that's out there, and how can we manage that in a way that can truly allow that box to be recycled? I think that collaborative effort is the way that you improve. That has worked well for the forest products industry, and I think it's something that other industries should look at if they're having difficulties.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Stabenow.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our witnesses today. Ms. Murray, in the 2018 Farm Bill, I championed a composting and food waste reduction pilot project under the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovation Production. And I'm so glad to see the work that you're doing in Michigan and in Detroit. Working with my partner, Senator Bozeman, I'm looking forward to building on that work in the next Farm Bill and focusing on supporting composting activities and decreasing food waste. What types of barriers has Detroit Dirt faced in its efforts to transport food waste and process it into compost?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. Some of the barriers have been, there's multiple barriers, but over the years, we've experienced transportation from food banks to homeless shelters and folks that could actually use the food. At first, it was an insurance issue. A lot of people were concerned about insurance, but with stadiums, restaurants, and any type of manufacturer of food, a lot of times that excess food is getting dumped in the landfills or burned in incinerators because they don't have enough companies to actually transport that excess material. So I think there's an opportunity to build on that and have more companies that are transporting and logistics to help fill those voids. Some of the other challenges have been with education. We feel like we have to go above and beyond with education, because the municipalities, I think at times, what happens is we focus on food waste, but we look past other low-hanging fruits such as yard waste. And the municipalities actually can buy back. When I speak about the circular economy and we talk about markets, some of the municipalities on a state and as well as local level can purchase that product back. They're already buying supplies or materials or resources from other sources. They can buy back compost and processed yard waste as well. So we have to look at, those barriers. I just think it's a matter of bridging the gap and understanding what the byproducts are and the value. At General Motors, when we ran a pilot with the Detroit Zoo and General Motors and Blue Cross Blue Shield, they bought a lot of the compost back for their landscape. And they weren't really thinking about that. But landscapers and other municipalities with yard waste and food waste or other products. But I think the other challenge is just making sure that people understand what food waste is, because they get a little bit scared about the ick factor of it. And that's why I think that education is the key, bringing awareness so they understand how to compost.
Great. Thank you so much. This is an exciting area, I think, for all of us to be working in. And let me ask Mr. Harrison, you mentioned in your testimony, and Senator Bozeman indicated as well, that the 2020 paper recycling rate was just about 66%, 65.7%. That's really amazing. And I also want to agree with Senator Whitehouse that plastics recycling is woefully inadequate. So I really appreciate overall what the industry has done. Your industry has recovered more than 47 million tons of paper for recycling. But even with those impressive numbers, I know you're pushing to go even higher, which is very important. And so with that in mind, I introduced the Paper Act that prevents waste-to-energy facilities from earning a tax credit for burning recyclable paper. So could you talk about the importance of recovered fibers to your company and whether eliminating a tax incentive for burning paper would increase the recycling opportunities for the paper industry?
Thanks, Senator. The Paper Act, international supports the Paper Act. The bill will help ensure that the federal production tax credit protects the integrity of recovered fiber stream so that paper recycling can continue to be an environmental success story. When we think about the recycling in general, recycling is being able to take something that's completed its primary use and be able to collect that and reuse it in a similar fashion going forward. We do think that, again, being able to do that in the paper industry, we've shown that that's important. One thing that I said in my opening statements is $5 billion of investment, 8 million tons increase that's going to happen. We're going to need that fiber. And so, being able to have all the fiber available to support that industry, support sustainable packaging for the customers is going to be important to drive the circular economy going forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Well, for our witnesses, I'm going to kind of ask a few more questions in anticipation of our chairman coming back in. I see Senator Kelly, so we'll wait just a second. And if you're ready, Senator Kelly, or I can ask a question and ready to go, just like a good astronaut would be. Ready? Thank you. Sorry to rush you there.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And thank you for holding this hearing today. This question is for Mr. Harvey, who I believe is remote. Mr. Harvey, I appreciated that you took time in your testimony to discuss the unique challenges rural communities face when establishing and sustaining recycling programs. And I appreciate that both of the bills we're discussing today take steps to address these challenges. Many rural communities want to offer curbside recycling programs, but in recent years, it's gotten increasingly challenging for these programs to make financial sense. For example, in 2019, the city of Sierra Vista in Arizona was forced to end their curbside recycling program because they had to ship their recyclables nearly 200 miles to Phoenix. And then the numbers, the math, the financials on this just didn't add up. In the past 3 years, 7 cities in Arizona have ended curbside recycling. So, Mr. Harvey, can you expand upon your testimony about the costs that rural and disadvantaged communities face when they must choose whether to ship recyclables tens or hundreds of miles to the nearest processing facility or to end recycling programs? And then what can the federal government do to support recycling in rural areas?
Thank you. I think what the biggest issue facing us is certainly the cost to collect, transport, and process. And when we ran into the situation where China was not accepting any of our material, the recycling markets throughout the world collapsed. They went negative on us. There was no value for the materials that we were collecting. And so we had to institute, in a lot of cases, we instituted processing costs at our MRFs, where before when we didn't have to do that because the value of those recyclables after we processed them covered that. But when it doesn't matter what material that you put in a truck, it costs money to send that down the road. It costs money to buy special trucks to collect the recyclables. It costs money to buy the tractor trailers to transport now from a satellite facility to a MRF. It costs to process that material, and then it costs to ship it out to the consuming mills. So all of those costs can add up significantly, depending on what part of the country that you're in. So that's that's why I think you're facing these issues right now. As we start to get into a more robust marketplace with recyclables, hopefully we'll see some of those costs come down. And I think that this is where we need the support of the federal government to come in and subsidize, maybe, in some of these situations where it's costing a municipality too much money to transport and process those recyclables.
Mr. Harvey, what within the market could change to result in a more robust market for recyclables?
I guess the easy answer to that would be a guaranteed price for what we get paid for the materials that we process. But it doesn't. It fluctuates it's a very supply and demand basis, and it fluctuates on that supply and demand. If we knew that every day for the next 10 years we were going to receive a certain threshold of price for the materials, then at least we'd know what we'd have. But we have to be able to adapt to that pricing and make changes in our systems to adapt to that pricing.
And is the only way for that to happen is there needs to be some support from the federal government, or is there another free market scenario where that could come to pass?
I don't see anything happening in the free marketplace. And I'm a free marketplace guy. I've always built my business. I've been doing this for 50 years, and we've wrote it up and we've wrote it down. And I believe in the free marketplace, but there's no guarantee in the free marketplace. So that's the only issue that we deal with.
Well, thank you, Mr. Harvey. And if the senator from Alaska is ready, I have one more question. If I'll go over the time, unless you were ready right now.
No, go ahead.
All right. And this question is for Mr. Yepsen. One of the biggest challenges recycling programs face right now is finding end markets for recyclable materials and finding and finished compost. In fact, one of the leading challenges I hear from communities in Arizona who are struggling to maintain recycling programs or beginning composting programs is that it's costly to find buyers willing to take a finished product. That's why I appreciate the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act, which takes the first steps to address this problem through a comprehensive study on the end markets for recyclable and composted materials. Mr. Yepsen, can you expand upon why this study could be so groundbreaking, and has anything like this been done before?
I do think it would be groundbreaking. There's been some research done on end markets for finished compost, and the U.S. Composting Council has published reports on this and really advocates for different markets and has case studies around use for things like the Department of Transportation, which has really helped spec compost into Department of Transportation projects. I think, as we heard also earlier from Passion, we see more and more efforts from whether that's a business or a community that is trying to divert their food scraps and yard trimmings to compost, also committing to buying that back. So we know that whether it's a corporate campus that has a composting program and has grounds, or a municipality that has landscaping needs. And I think that having a federal level tracking of this would be really helpful, because I think it's oftentimes just that composting is so new that a lot of communities don't have an understanding of just how many varieties of avenues that finished compost could be used in.
And how many communities nationwide actually have a composting program? Do you know, like, by a percentage?
For yard trimmings composting, the number is fairly large, but it's seasonal in most places for yard trimmings collection. So there are around 4,700 composting facilities taking yard trimmings. But the number is much smaller when it comes to food scraps composting and really robust curbside programs, and that's less than 10% of the population.
Thank you. The senator from Alaska.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. This is an area that actually has a lot of bipartisan support, and when you are helping us think through solutions, I want you to try and help us think through what would be bipartisan solutions. So let me give you an example. Senator Whitehouse, I know, has already asked some questions about plastics. You may have seen he and I have been putting forward legislation that's been very strongly supported. The Save Our Seas Act, the Save Our Seas 2.0 Act have all been passed and signed into law, and now are working on implementation. So let me ask Mr. Harvey and Mr. Hairston, give me your thoughts quickly, particularly really following up on Senator Whitehouse's question earlier about plastics and what you see as bipartisan approach. You think you guys have a sense of what that would be? I'm not looking for like big top-down mandates and taxes, but there are other things that I think can achieve a lot of broad-based support here on an issue that in many ways is a uniting issue. The oceans cleanup, oceans plastic issue certainly is one here in the Senate. But do you have any thoughts on those in terms of plastics in particular? Maybe Ms. Hairston, we'll start with you.
Yes, thanks, Senator, for the question. Spoke to it a little earlier. As we think about, addressing those issues, I think of it from a fiber-based industry and what have we done and what are the things that have been successful for us. And, we believe, one, honestly, that the producers have a responsibility. And over our 3 decades, we've been focusing on infrastructure investments to help drive that piece. The recycling rate for cardboard continues to be high. We continue to see.
Why is that high and it's not high in other areas? You guys know or have a sense?
Yeah, I can't speak to what's driving the economics of plastic. I can speak to the things that we see in the fiber base where, we have a local commodity that's collected that has global demand. And we've been able to leverage that to provide sustainable fiber-based packaging for our customers. We think that that's continues an opportunity. Exactly what's the problem with plastic, I can't speak to or don't feel comfortable speaking to at this time.
Okay, Mr. Harvey, do you have a sense on the questions that I posed?
So I'm having just a little bit of trouble hearing, but you're talking about plastics and a solution. From our standpoint, we are kind of like in the middle. We don't manufacture it and we don't use it. We just kind of pick it up and process it. But I will tell you, in all my years of doing this, there has been a tremendous amount of confusion on what is and isn't recyclable and the different types of resins that are available. And it's very, very difficult when these manufacturers keep coming out with new products and a different resin that looks the same as maybe something else. Sorted out, and our opticals can't either. So, again, I think a lot of what will happen, I think this accessibility that we need to get into these rural areas is going to help that. If we can collect those materials and not dispose of them or throw them out the window of a car or throw them into a creek that now it ends up in the ocean, it's the accessibility, and it's going after these robust programs and getting them working.
Great. Let me ask a follow-on question, and Ms. Murray, maybe you can lead off on it, and it relates to what Mr. Harvey just mentioned, and then anyone else wants to jump in. So my state is a very big state in terms of size, but a pretty small population. So about 70% of the households do not have access to curbside recycling. So how do you bring recycling infrastructure to many parts of the country that don't have it, particularly big rural, spread out parts with more limited or spread out populations? And then related, I think it's related, does the answer to that question also have something to do with to what degree you want the emphasis, you think the emphasis should be on local government initiatives versus kind of big Fed, top down? In Alaska, we often say, hey, one size does not fit all. Federal government comes up with some plan, and we're usually the state that it doesn't work in. So that's a secondary question, but I think it's related to the first question.
Yes, thank you, Senator. That's an excellent question. I'm a strong believer in local policies and ordinances, simply because those mandates will give you benchmarks. They're going to produce the data. It simply lets you know who's and what neighborhoods are doing what. And municipalities have resources as well. They have yard waste and other things that these households can actually use. So if we're creating ordinances around a circular economy where it says, okay, if you're going to utilize, depending on what region and where you are, your yard waste clippings, as well as your food waste, those are byproducts that we can actually manufacture and distribute back to landscapers or others who need it for tree planting, for water runoff, and other necessary needs too, as well as soil remediation. I'm in an industrial city, so we're always looking to remediate soils for brownfields and other issues that we face. And so I think education is key, of making sure households understand the difference between, carbon. In our composting world, you have like the greens, right? All the decomposable food waste and spent grain from breweries, food waste from restaurants, manufacturers, but then you have the browns, the cardboards, the leaves. So you have to process these things in a certain way that makes sense. But I think with education, it makes it simple for most residents to understand that. So I think the federal government as well as local should be working together depending on what region you're in the country, because these are all processes that can be done. But there's also technologies, if you're in Alaska or Michigan where weather permitting, you have a bunch of snow. If you have these closed facilities with in-vessel anaerobic digestion, certain technologies that can take that material, you can produce and accelerate the process easier. But we really don't have these facilities set up around the country as much as we should. And I think that investment in infrastructure is going to be huge to accelerate that. I mean, that's really what we need to be able to do, is to sort and separate that waste stream so we know what the value is, but we're also not just MRFs, but there has to be composting facilities as well as recycling facilities. And I think that that's something that we're sleeping on. A lot of people talk about transfer stations, but they're not looking at actually taking certain technologies that exist in Denmark and Germany and other places around the world that can replace the landfill. It's happening. So I hope that I answered your question, because education is the key in households, but also mandates and ordinances with the local government are going to be key. I mean, I've seen Detroit slow walk this thing for years, for the last decade, and then last year, the education and the investment in education and having the people understand what these processes are has accelerated the process, especially with K through 12 schools and universities taking that home to those households as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Harrison, in the last 10 years, and especially in the last 2 years, we've seen a rise in total online retail sales, which means an increased demand for paper packaging. To meet the demand, it's been vital to have as much recovered fiber in the circular market as possible. How has the paper industry's investment into research helped you prepare for the upswing in e-commerce we're seeing right now?
Thanks, Senator. Yeah, the data that the Act will provide was going to really give us more detail on where e-commerce sales and that packaging material is available to be recovered. One of the things that we've talked about, historically, recycling has been a percentage of residential, a percentage of commercial. As we see the e-commerce shift, we're seeing a lot more of the recycling of fiber-based products coming through the residential stream. Understanding that stream, understanding what's available to be recovered will allow our industry to continue to invest in the right infrastructure and support to be able to drive the circular economy and get that commodity back into the value stream.
Very good. And the rest of the panel, anybody that wants to jump in, in regard to the Recycling Infrastructure and Accessibility Act, what type of projects do you expect to be completed should this program be enacted?
Yeah, I think building off of this question about how you make sure that we have solutions that fit the wide variety of states, whether that's rural, urban, or suburban environments, I think that what I'd be really hoping is, I think, connected to that rural environment, for composting, we've seen a lot of success for drop-off programs for food scraps composting in more rural states. I know maybe not as large as Alaska, but in Vermont and in Wisconsin, they've had successful drop-off programs for composting where curbside isn't available. So I think that would be one indicator of success.
Anybody else?
And yeah, I just would add to that we would look for, these programs to give us a source of more material to process and get that material, collect all that material and get it into something where a package, a bundle or whatever that the end users can use. I mean, that's basically what we're looking at today, is to try to get the recycling rate up in not only rural America, but all over America, get the whole nationwide recycling rate up. Let's use these resources that we have in front of us and turn them into another product or into the same product.
Hopefully, Senator, we will be able to see more mandates around banning food waste from going to the landfills. I'm a little aggressive with this because I've been involved for the last 12 or 13 years of my life, and I've seen, places like in cities in Massachusetts where our states like Massachusetts and California, different pockets who have aggressively mandated the banning of food waste going to the landfill or being burned in the incinerator to begin with. But I also think the investment in creating these sites with the right equipment and technology is going to be key. So I think we're going to see a lot of excitement around entrepreneurs and advocates who have been working in this, particularly me. I would love to be able to expand in Detroit. I mean, we went from a 2.5 acre site, we're going before City Council here soon to expand to 5 or 6 acres. And I believe that once we create these larger pilots, that's going to open up a door for more opportunity for expansion.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Senator, just one thing I'd like to add to that question is, the power of the data is going to allow us to solve the right problem for that community. one of the things that we talk about sometimes may be more of a federal or a broader brush. The reality is the solution is different based on each community. And by having the data, it allows that community to really focus there. It may be education, it may be infrastructure, it may be something else. But by having this data that this bill or this act will put in place, it's going to allow us to really tailor that need to meet each community's gap and solve that problem.
Yeah, that really was going to be my next, kind of follow-up. And one of the things that Senator Carper and I did in the Recycling, Composting, Accountability Act was make it so that we collect a lot more data and making sure that the data is out there to help you all, do your stuff, but also to inform the legislators, the people at all levels of government as to what exactly is going on so that, we have a better ability to respond. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Roseman, thank you so much. This is an interesting morning. Got all these votes going on the floor, and committees meeting, marking up, voting on issues, and trying to hold a hearing on an important issue. But thank you for helping to make it all work and for being a great partner in this. And I also want to say what I think of it. I just want to thank our staffs. Sometimes we get the credit as members or blamed for progress made or not made. And we're blessed with the staff we have on both sides of the aisle. So I want to thank all of them, including one who's leaving at the end of this week. I want to come back, if I could, to Mr. Hairston for a question dealing with recycling end markets. And Mr. Harrison, we all know that the existence of robust end markets for recycled products is critical to the longevity and effectiveness of the recycling industry. The Recycling and Composting Accountability Act would require the Environmental Protection Agency to study and issue a report on the end market sale of all recyclable materials collected from households and processed at a materials recovery facility. This would include looking at the end market sale of materials like, for example, plastic, like paper, like glass, like aluminum, just to name a few of the most common ones. My question of you, Mr. Harrison, is this: based on your experience, how could this study on end markets be a useful tool to both the public and private sector, and what kind of benefits might we see from studying this at the federal level?
Thanks for the question. Again, I think what the study is going to allow us to do is really have data to go and confirm or potentially identify, what is the hypothesis or the opportunity we're trying to solve. The end markets, international paper, again, has a 2030 goal, 100% recyclable, reusable, compostable material. Our goal is that product that we're producing is able to meet that circularity. This data will help prove that, and it'll help us continue to innovate solutions for our customer base and for others. So I think, when I think of the Recycling and Composting Act and the data that we'll have on both a local and federal level, it'll allow private companies along with the public to partner on how to solve the gaps and where materials really being diverted, and how can we do the right things to drive that end market. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Yepsen, a question for you, if I could. Also, composting end markets. What are some of the differences between composting and recycling end markets? What are some of the differences between composting end markets and recycling end markets? And how will this separate study be useful in ultimately reducing the amount of food waste in our landfills?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are so many differences, I think, for the end markets for recyclables versus compost. When we're thinking about recycling end markets, we're thinking about post-consumer recycled content going back into new packaging as a direct input. When we're thinking about compost end markets, those are not a direct input back into new packaging materials or directly into new food, right? There's a slightly longer system there. And so I think the reason that this study and extra data will be so important is just showing all those varieties of avenues for end markets for finished compost, and making sure that we are driving those end markets because the commonality between recycling end markets and composting is that if you don't have an end market, your business falls apart. And we heard about this earlier, that a lot of composting businesses have historically focused on that tip fee, the money generated for materials coming in, rather than the markets for the finished compost and the sale of that compost. And obviously, you need both of those for recycling and composting, the tip fee and the end market. But I think that that's where there is some commonality. We have to have that more knowledge and data around what those end markets are and ways that we can make sure that we drive that through.
Thanks for that response. Mr. Epson, we're going to stay with you for just a minute, and I'll direct the same question on proper management of composting facilities. I want to direct this to you, but also to Ms. Murray, but I'll direct it to you initially, and then we'll kick it over to her. One of the challenges that often, and this deals with proper management of composting facilities. Mr. Epson and Ms. Murray, one of the challenges that often companies, composting facilities, and may act as a deterrent for communities who might otherwise want to start a program, is the odor. In fact, my state of Delaware has faced some challenges with this issue in the past. We do a fair amount. We have a lot of chickens in Delaware. We're not a big state. We're a big ag state, as it turns out, and we raise, I think for every person in Delaware, there's 300 chickens, and that they create a lot of chicken manure. And we've been working for decades to figure out what to do with all of that chicken manure and straw and sawdust that comes out of our poultry houses. And I think we're making some pretty good progress, some really good progress. But my question with you is, what can composting facility managers do to reduce or eliminate any odors associated with composting?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm familiar with some of the composting facilities that have existed and are no longer in Delaware, partly around issues due to odor. And I think that the simple answer is there are ways to successfully compost without huge amounts of odor. And the U.S. Composting Council has a certified operator program, and there are composting classes that happen all around the country in different states, hosted by, again, the U.S. Composting Council or universities or master gardener programs. And so it's definitely possible to run a facility without odors. And it's, comes down to biology, I think. And they're not super high-tech solutions to control odor that can be taught within these schools. And I think, again, it kind of leads back to that other question of, what is the business model of those composting facilities? Are they really driving to get the maximum tonnage coming in to get that tip fee, or are they really taking their time to compost successfully and well rather than trying to rush that process?
All right, thanks for that response. Ms. Murray, really the same two questions. The first question, again, was what can composting facility managers do to reduce or eliminate any odors associated with composting? And then a follow-up question is how can education programs like the development of voluntary guidelines in the Recycling and Composting Accountability Act that we're having this hearing on today, how can those guidelines help enhance existing or new compost programs? Take it away.
Thank you. Really quickly on the end market question that you asked earlier.
Please.
Department of Transportation, construction companies, Department of Environmental Quality, these are all sources that can actually use as an end market for water runoff of freeways and interstates. Construction sites buy millions of dollars of compost and soils. They're always looking for resources around that. So I just wanted to put that on record that there are opportunities with Department of Transportation and other government organizations as well as construction companies that buy it as fill. But also when you look at land, lakes, rivers, when you look at soil remediation, there's an opportunity for us to divert that compost in those directions as well. Now, to the, and we've run pilots, so we've seen the water, soils, it captures water as a filter as well. So we've seen these things happen. And of course, you mentioned data, that is very important, but we have to hold waste management companies in general and others who control these landfills. We can collect all the data we want, but we have to mandate and make sure that we're getting the right data and that all honesty and transparency is happening when you're collecting the data as well. Now, when we're talking about odor, what I've done with manure, spent grain from breweries, restaurants, you have to look at, again, the carbon and nitrogen. As you mentioned, it depends on what the model is. So if you're receiving a lot of feedstock, if you will, that has odor, it's imperative that you manage that in a certain amount of time. If there's a time frame in which you do not want to allow those materials to sit and rot and decompose. So you have to have mandates around holding facilities accountable depending on zoning. This is where the local government is going to come into place as well. Municipalities have to have zoning and laws around what they're going to do in specific areas, because the zoning is key. Like in a place like Detroit, where we're located along the river, we have a certain zones that we only allow composting to be operated. That's going to be key. You do not want residents to smell these odors. But can we retain this water runoff and make sure that we're reducing odor? Absolutely. It's about process. There are simple solutions. You can use sawdust, wood chips, all kinds of browns, I call them, products, the carbon, to suppress that. But in vessel technology, anaerobic digesters, the zoo that we work with, the Detroit Zoological Society, has an anaerobic digester. That works as a simple system. That manure and that food waste is processed. That energy that's retained, that methane, is used to heat a building, the animal hospital. The solids go into one area, the liquids go into another. So it can be done. And, so the odor can definitely be suppressed. Your last question, I believe you talked about education. Is that what you mentioned?
Yeah.
What I've seen, which is phenomenal, is let's take a company like General Motors, or in the automotive community, they feed thousands of people. General Motors has 25 restaurants in their headquarters. Then you take a small mom and pop restaurant, right? Or you have someone as large as Campbell's or a brewing facility. What happens is all those materials represent something different. They all have a certain lifespan. You have to go in and educate the head chef of these restaurants to make sure that they're sorting and separating, just like you have to talk to a major corporation about how long is that food waste going to sit on that docking area. We've collected food waste from a numerous of sources, but it's all in process and education, depending on if you are manufacturing food, if you're cooking the food, whoever you are, whether it's a household, there's a lifespan in which you have to manage that food waste properly.
Well, every now and then we have witnesses, after we ask questions, they'll say thank you for that question. I want to say thank you for those answers. Those are very good, very helpful. This next question is for all witnesses. I think every one of you has mentioned the term circular market or circular markets as we've been in this hearing today. But we're going to start with, we're going to kind of go in reverse order here. We'll go with Mr. Harvey, Ben Harvey, and we'll ask you to respond initially, Ben. But this past fall, as you know, we held a roundtable series and committee hearing on the concept of a circular economy. We heard from stakeholders from a variety of industries and organizations, as well as state and local governments, as to what it would take to truly transition to an economy that values and promotes circularity at every step of the industrial process. The Recycling and Composting Accountability Act would continue this conversation by directing the Environmental Protection Agency to conduct a study on the amount of recyclable materials that are being lost out of the circular market in a variety of ways. All right, that question. How can, Ben, I'm going to ask you to lead off on this one, but how can having a better understanding of how materials that could otherwise be reused or being lost from the circular market be beneficial to each of your industries and the country as a whole? And Mr. Harvey, I'm going to ask you to take that one initially, and then we'll turn to Mr. Hairston.
Okay, thank you. It gives us the right data gives us the opportunity to plan our MRFs and our markets to take this material and again, bring it in. If we have the data soon enough, the correct data, the amount of material that we're going to be gathering, where it's going to come from, what we can turn it into, then we can make smart business decisions. We can make those decisions. Okay, do we put in more optical in our case, in our industry's case, can we put in more optical sorters? Do we need to have more robotics? Do we need to establish and look for more markets for this material to go into? Without this information, it comes into our facilities and we're dealing with it kind of on the go. We're very adaptable. We're used to doing that. But again, concrete, good data is so important to moving this along.
All right, thank you. Mr. Harrison, please, same question.
Thanks, Senator. We strongly support the provisions that requires EPA to conduct a study of recycled materials in commercial and municipal waste streams for the previous 10 years that were diverted from the circular market. We believe that the study will highlight the strong recycling rates of paper and paper-based packaging and help clarify why our current recycling rates are reaching a practical maximum without potential regulations to improve. Examples like products similar to wallboard tape and tissue, which aren't really identified for recovery, are things that may show up in the study. But the data will also, again, allow us to make sure we're focused on the right items. One of the biggest things impacting the circularity of fiber-based products is contamination. The Recycle Act is focused on education, and we think with education that reduces contamination, but the data will also help make sure we're focused in the right areas going forward.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask our other two witnesses to Mr. Yepsen and Ms. Murray. I'm going to ask you to answer that question for the record. And we'll, on that, but now I'm going to yield to Senator Bozeman. No, you're all done? Okay, all in, okay. In that case, I'm going to ask our Senator Yepsen, you stayed long enough, you might be, Mr. Yepsen and Ms. Murray, to go back and answer the same question that was just been answered by other witnesses, and that is just to remind you, how can having a better understanding of how materials that could otherwise be reused are being lost from the circular market be beneficial to each of your industries and to our country as a whole? Please go ahead. Mr. Yepsen, Ms. Murray.
Yes, thank you. I think one of the reasons that this would be so important is that we needed the systems-based approach, right? It's not just the number of the facilities or the number of collection programs. And having federal data and studies that show all of these different elements and start using some common language are really important, because right now we have different state reporting requirements, and I think that's been part of the challenge when we look at something like composting, is that there are different definitions of what's recyclable or compostable from community to community, from state to state. States have different requirements for what has to be reported to them or not reported. And that makes it really challenging as we start trying to think of what a national strategy is to make sure that we're able to have more communities with composting programs.
Thank you. Ms. Murray, do you want to clean up on this one?
Sure. I agree with Rhodes that, with a national strategy, we have to look at throughout the country, the different regions and states, because it's all different. And for instance, in Michigan, when you look at ordinances on the local level with the city and whether you look at the state level, I agree with the language. It all has to translate the same in a harmonious way. We need a commonality around speaking climate and speaking around composting. But the Department of Transportation may get a different message from the state than what they may get on language from the city. And I think it all has to align in order for us to positively move forward. When I first started Detroit Dirt, the city did not have any ordinances in place. We had to adhere to guidelines with the state on, composting. But now with Part 115, which is what they're working on in Michigan, we're looking at categorizing, if you will, a small household composting urban farmer is different than a mid-sized level composter or an industrial composter. So we definitely want to make sure that we're categorizing the businesses according to certifications, but also making sure that we adhere to a common language that's being used on a city and state and federal level. So it all translates the same.
Thank you. Last question from me and from our committee today will be directed to Mr. Harvey, and it deals with Mr. Harvey. It deals with technical assistance. As you know, many communities have a desire to improve their recycling programs, but oftentimes they lack the expertise to make meaningful changes to those programs. The Recycling and Composting Accountability Act that Senator Bozeman and I have co-sponsored would allow the Environmental Protection Agency to provide technical assistance to state, to local and tribal communities that wish to reduce their overall waste or improve their composting and recycling programs. And Mr. Harvey, my question is simply this: do you believe that the ability to provide technical assistance is important? Can you share with us an example or two of how receiving technical assistance has helped improve a recycling program? Mr. Harvey.
I definitely think that technical assistance is critical to, critical to our industry to help the municipalities or help the rural areas to increase their recycling. So technical, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has given grants for technical assistance that's helped us develop markets. And those, developing those markets, so now that we can bring more material in through our system helps us. They've developed technical assistance on glass. They've also given us technical assistance on organics, how to process organics, given us the tools we need to collect and process that material. We're actually using it for anaerobic digestion. We're not composting it. But those are a couple of types of the technical assistance that we have used in our operation.
Well, good. Thank you. Those are all the questions we have today. I want to just do a quick wrap up here, if I can. We have a couple of sisters who work in our Dover offices and Wilmington office, and the King sisters, and they have a favorite saying. Their saying is, "Teamwork makes the dream work." How about that? Teamwork makes the dream work. We're blessed in this committee to be really good at teamwork. And we don't agree on every single thing, but we reported unanimously out of this committee last year bipartisan infrastructure legislation dealing with roads, highways, bridges, bipartisan legislation dealing with, water, drinking water, wastewater sanitation, all kinds of issues that can end up being part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill that the president signed into law. We've seen another good demonstration here today of teamwork. And I ran out of here to go over to one of my other committees, Homeland Security Committee. I think we had a dozen or more nominations to vote on. We had, I think, a dozen or so bills to go through and to vote on separately. And I had an opportunity to speak on at least one of those and make all of our votes. We're on another vote on the floor. And this could not have happened without the great teamwork we had here, especially demonstrated by Senator Capito and Senator Bozeman. I just want to say especially thank yous to them and to others who participated in this hearing, both here in person and remotely. I want to thank our staffs as well. We couldn't do it without you. And this is such an important issue and one that I'm passionate about, and I know a lot of folks in our committee are and across the country. Every now and then we have an opportunity on issues that are of importance to our country on which there is agreement. I like to say the sun, the moon, the stars come in alignment. This is one such day, one such issue. I've been waiting for this issue, for this day for a long time, and I believe that Senator Capito and Senator Bozeman and others on our committee have as well. I have all these aphorisms that I like to use, and I could go just go through. In adversity lies opportunity. That's Einstein. And plenty of adversity here in terms of what do we do with all this waste, and whether it's food waste or whether it's other kind of waste that ends up in our maybe in our trash cans or maybe in our recycling efforts, but there's plenty of opportunity here too. I'm always looking for ways to put people to work. I'm a recovering governor, and the idea of doing something that's good for our planet and good for putting people to work and helping them be self-sufficient is always something that's near and dear to my heart. Someone mentioned hub and spokes system. I think a couple of people mentioned that. A couple of our witnesses did. With respect to improving opportunities to recycle and compost in more rural parts of our country. And I especially appreciated hearing that from a state that has a lot of urban up in the north, but a lot of rural in the southern part of our state. One of the other thoughts that came to mind for me, of course, is find out what works and do more of that. There you go. Find out what works, do more of that. I was governor and chairman of the National Governors Association. Tommy Thompson, governor of Wisconsin, and I helped create something called Center for Best Practices, kind of a clearinghouse of good ideas. And I'm going to be sharing with them. I should still share with the National Governors Association's Center for Best Practices. We're going to be talking with them probably later this week about this hearing and some of what we're learning and some of what we're hearing is we can use the NGA as a way to get the good information out. And I just am so encouraged by what we've heard here today, encouraged by what's happening in particularly places like Detroit, but other places, including Delaware and places across the country, rural, urban, and somewhere in between. There are any number of ways to do good things for our planet and create economic opportunity and jobs. And we're on to some really good stuff here. Really good stuff here. Let me see, I think I need to say, this is printed out for me so I won't forget it. Again, thank you for all of those who joined us in person and one from afar. Your support of the two pieces of legislation is going to be real important as we work to pass both of them, make them better, and hopefully pass them and work with the House and the administration to get them done. I'm thrilled that the EPA, led by Michael Regan, has gotten really serious about recycling and taken a lot of input from our community, from our committee, as they've provided their recent paper. We enjoyed hearing all the ways that these bills could improve our nation's recycling and composting programs. And you've also helped us to appreciate that our waste challenges are vast, but not insurmountable if we take steps now. Before we adjourn, a little bit of housekeeping. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a variety of materials that include letters from stakeholders and other materials that relate to today's hearing. I'd love to ask unanimous consent when I'm the only one here, because I'm not going to object to my unanimous consent request. So then it's agreed to. Additionally, I would say to my colleagues on the committee, you'll be allowed to submit questions for the record through the close of business on Wednesday, February the 16th, Wednesday, February the 16th. That's a couple of weeks. We will compile those questions, send them out to our witnesses, and ask that you reply by Wednesday, March the 2nd. I believe that's 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And with that, in the Navy, when people do an especially good job on important issues, we have a saying, it's bravo Zulu, bravo Zulu. I would say to each of you, to our committee members, to those who help staff this committee and our members, bravo Zulu all around. And with that, I think it's a wrap. And I'm going to go run and vote again. All right, thanks, everyone.